everyone, and welcome to some of the stories we have for you right now. An unmoving deadline. The new warning from Washington about the threat of impending tariffs.
The February 1st date for Canada and Mexico still holds.
We have the details of Ottawa's new plan, a relief plan to counter the potential damage.
The exchange rate is pretty bad, and there's also the insurance.
Leaving the nest, why some Canadian snowbirds are trying to sell off their U.S. homes.
I actually almost lost my house. I still owe $20,000.
Scammed while looking for love, how one man dated and deceived multiple women.
Advertise in a safer way for the consumer.
Plus unleashing a new Canadian tool to avoid puppy scams.
CTV National News with Sandy Ronaldo.
Canada is staring down a February 1st tariff deadline from Donald Trump. And with 4 days to go, Caroline Leavitt, the U.S. president's new press secretary, in her first public briefing, was asked about that.
Again, he was asked and answered this question this past weekend when he took a lot of questions from the press, and he said that the February 1st date for Canada and Mexico still holds.
So a clear indication that Trump is standing firm. And today, CTV News confirmed help is on the way to deal with potential tariffs. Let's bring in CTV senior political correspondent Michael Couture. Mike, what can you tell us about Ottawa's plan?
Well, Sandy, the amount of relief will depend on how big those tariffs are. Sources tell us no specific programs have been designed, but they could reach pandemic levels if President Trump follows through on his threat to impose 25% tariffs on all Canadian imports into the U.S.
It'll bring the industry to its knees.
A blunt assessment of the impact of U.S. tariffs from the head of a manufacturing company connected to the automotive sector. With deeply integrated supply chains, federal ministers continue to warn Americans will bear the brunt of the pain.
There cannot be tariffs without consequences. There cannot be tariffs without impact. And there cannot be tariffs with a higher cost for U.S. consumers.
If those warnings don't work, the federal government is preparing counter tariffs plus a stimulus package to help businesses and Canadians. Sources tell CTV News that plan does not need to launch as soon as tariffs are levied on Canadian products. Instead, it will address the economic impacts as they become apparent.
It's no different than the pandemic. It's not about one level of government. It's about all three levels of government working collaboratively.
Ford says the public and private sectors must work together to invest in infrastructure in the face of this threat.
We're going to see an unprecedented attack to our families, to our businesses, to our communities.
In an interview on Bloomberg's Big Take podcast, former Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister and current Liberal leadership contender Chrystia Freeland said Canada needs to publish a list of American products that we could slap with counter tariffs to get President Trump's attention.
I believe that he doesn't care that much if Canadian politicians are jumping around, banging our fists on the table, etc., but he cares about Americans.
Economists say the key to any type of stimulus package is to make it targeted and time-sensitive to prevent it from becoming inflationary spending or to have it contribute to the deficit. Sandy?
Mike, thank you. Northern border security has been another issue on Trump's mind, with Canada pumping more than $1 billion into upping surveillance that includes the use of sophisticated helicopters and drones. On the other hand, along the BC border with Washington, the Americans are using barriers and rocks. And it comes as some foreign nationals allegedly made a run for it. CTV's BC Bureau Chief Andrew Johnson is at that border. Andrew, set the scene for us.
Sandy, I'm near the Pacific border crossing. On one side of these rocks, Metro Vancouver. On the other, Washington State. Not far from here, yesterday, a witness caught a dramatic illegal crossing on camera. People in a pickup truck can be seen laying planks down across a gully. Then they get back into the vehicle and hit the gas, smashing across the line into Canada. Take a listen. Border Patrol says it notified RCMP, who later arrested 5 Romanian nationals, one of whom was wanted by police. U.S. Border Patrol says illegal crossings here are on the rise, so they're adding more of these rock barriers as well as concrete barriers to try to prevent people from charging across the line. It comes after another wild scene at the nearby Peace Arch crossing last month. The driver of a stolen pickup truck blew through the border into the U.S. and led police on a chase down the interstate highway. Officers eventually rammed the vehicle and arrested a BC man. U.S. Border Patrol is also reinforcing crossings across the country. Along the border between Maine and New Brunswick, concrete barriers have gone up. Maybe small measures compared to drones and helicopters on the Canadian side, but perhaps enough to stop an illegal charge across the line like we saw near here yesterday.
Wow.
Sandy.
Okay, CTV's Andrew Johnson. Now, the border came up at that Washington press briefing today, and there was a lot more that came up as well in view of the president's ongoing flurry of executive orders. He's also making good on campaign promises, from freezing federal aid to ramping up those immigration raids. CTV's Washington Bureau Chief Joy Malbon reports.
President Donald Trump's new Homeland Secretary Kristi Noem posting video of immigration raids in New York, arresting a suspected migrant gang member in the Bronx, wanted in connection with a home invasion in Colorado. Noem declaring dirtbags like this will continue to be removed from our streets. This show of force, mass deportations of illegal migrants, sometimes shackled and herded into military planes, are images Trump wants the world to see. The White House says so far 3,500 arrests have been made, but along with violent criminals, undocumented migrants are being rounded up and deported too.
He is focused on launching the largest mass deportation operation in American history of illegal criminals. And if you are an individual, a foreign national, who illegally enters the United States of America, you are, by definition, a criminal.
This as the Trump administration ordered a freeze on all federal assistance, grants, loans, and other federal money that could affect millions of Americans. A government memo cites foreign aid, non-governmental organizations, diversity programs, and the Green New Deal, putting a temporary freeze on any program affected by Trump's executive orders as he sets about remaking government.
This is a dagger at the heart of the average American family in red states, in blue states, in cities, in suburbs, in rural areas. It is just outrageous.
All of it creating confusion and outrage, and yet another court challenge to Donald Trump's executive actions as he flexes his new presidential powers. Joy Malbon, CTV News, Washington.
Well, earlier today, we learned the findings of a commission of inquiry into foreign interference in this country. Justice Marie-Josée Ugg saying that there is no evidence of any traitors in Parliament, no list of culpable MPs, but there was problematic conduct. CTV's Judy Trin now on the message and the more than 50 recommendations. Judy.
Sandy, this report is the result of 18 months of investigation where more than 100 witnesses testified, including the Prime Minister.
Our democratic institutions have remained robust.
In her final report, Justice Marie-Josée Ugg said there was no list of parliamentarians colluding with foreign states, contradicting an earlier national security report which revealed witting and semi-witting individuals.
Nor have I seen any evidence to suggest that there are currently so-called traitors in Parliament. While I saw evidence of some concerning behavior, the evidence does not show any MPs plotting with foreign states against Canada's interests.
But there were politicians who had problematic relationships with diplomats and officials who didn't sound the alarm sooner.
That's the overall theme of the report, that up until recently, everybody involved has grossly underestimated this problem and not done enough with information passing along and dealing with it.
Hoke's report puts forward 51 recommendations.
Improving the ability of parliamentarians to understand the threat. And she's talking about, let's create a guide for them. Let's make sure they have proper training. Let's make sure they get the intelligence that they need to have. Let's make sure their staffs are properly trained.
After investigating the 2019 Liberal nomination race in Don Valley North, where international students were bussed in to cast ballots, the commissioner recommended that parties limit voting to citizens and permanent residents in nomination races. The Liberals are doing this in their leadership contest, and the NDP says it will follow.
I've instructed my party, my national director and team to follow all of the recommendations as it relates to political parties.
Justice Oak wants to see 24 of 51 recommendations implemented before the next election. That's unlikely, given the fact that all the opposition parties have said that they will vote no confidence on government bills when Parliament resumes. Sandy.
CTV's Judy Trin. One of the hitmen who killed a former Air India bombing suspect has been sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 20 years for his part in the killing. Tanner Fox pleaded guilty to second-degree murder last October and the death of Rapudaman Singh Malik 3 years ago. In 2005, the Sikh businessman was acquitted of charges related to the Air India bombing that killed 331 people in 1985. Fox's accomplice, Jose Lopez, also pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. He is due back in court on February the 6th. Well, as expected, Ontario Premier Doug Ford had a chat with the province's Lieutenant Governor today to dissolve Parliament a year and a half ahead of schedule and call an election for February the 27th. CTV's Siobhan Morris on Ford's thinking and what he hopes to accomplish. Siobhan.
Sandy, Progressive Conservative leader Doug Ford puts Donald Trump at the center of his reasoning for calling this election more than a year ahead of schedule. It's all about the tariffs and the threat that they present to the Ontario economy. This is groundwork that Ford has really been laying for many months now, talking about the existential threat that these tariffs could present to the economy in Ontario, costing up to 500,000 jobs. Ford has said repeatedly he believes he needs a mandate from the people in order to unleash tens of billions of dollars in stimulus spending should those tariffs come into place. Today, he's also talking about needing a stable mandate for the next 4 years to ensure that Ford is in place as long as Donald Trump is. We are hearing from opposition parties, though, that what the Premier is doing by calling this election early is just adding to the chaos and uncertainty. They want to see opposition parties and the government work together to face this tariff threat with a united front, whether that be a stimulus package or standing up to the U.S. government. They say that they plan to, over the course of their campaign, really highlight some of the shortcomings of the PC government over the last 6.5 years. Things like problems in healthcare, where we know more than 2.5 million Ontarians don't have access to primary care in the state of Ontario schools. Ontario voters will have their say February 27th. Sandy.
Siobhan, thank you. Speaking of healthcare, a story now full of questions about what's going on in Canada's healthcare system, and specifically one Alberta hospital. CTV News has spoken to a patient who claims she was left waiting for more than 24 hours, forgotten by staff, in what's being described as a closet. CTV's Kathy Lee reached out to the woman who says she has the photos to prove it. Kathy?
Sandy, Rose Roll says she is angry and traumatized after her experience at the Chinook Regional Hospital in Lethbridge, Alberta. This is a storage room that she stayed in for more than 24 hours before she was discharged. Rose is undergoing treatment for cancer and needs to be closely monitored at the hospital. On the 6th day of her week-long stay, she says staff told her they needed her bed for a sicker patient and moved her to that storage room. Rose says it was dirty, that she didn't get the care she required. She says she even had to find a new sheet for her bed and water.
I was really sad. I was disgusted. I just felt like, honestly, I felt like inmates got treated better. I felt really demoralized. What really scares me is, what if I have to go back there again? I legitimately have that fear now.
A patient advocacy group says Rose's story doesn't come as a shock and that there have been similar cases in other provinces across the country.
I don't think governments have done enough to address this ongoing problem with a lack of resources and a lack of caregivers, which leaves patients in the lurch. The pandemic took a really high toll on our healthcare system, especially on caregivers and on budgets, and really exposed the previous existing cracks that were in the system.
Alberta Health Services says it apologizes for what happened and has since cleaned up the room and removed the shelving unit. It says that the hospital is experiencing a high number of patients and the unit Rose was in is under a respiratory outbreak. Sandy.
CTV's Kathy Lee. Another sign of the times, some Canadian snowbirds who every year flock to Florida for the winter months are now trying to sell their winter getaways, blaming Donald Trump a bit, but mainly the low Canadian dollar and high cost of living. CTV's Quebec bureau chief Geneviève Beauchemin has been digging into the implications for sellers. Geneviève.
Well, Sandy, with the wind chill right now, it's about minus 20 degrees here, so that Florida sunshine seems mighty inviting. But many Canadian snowbirds are turning away from the Sunshine State.
There's a lot of Canadians selling, so I do have way more listings that I'm used to.
There's been a lot of talk about boycotting the United States since the election of U.S. President Donald Trump and his talk about making Canada the 51st state. But many of the real estate agents and the snowbirds we spoke to today say the reasons are far less political, but far more financial.
The price of commodities was lower in the grocery stores, things like that. Eating out was cheaper than back at home. But that's risen, and the Canadian dollar has gone down.
The Canadian dollar is worth less than 70 cents American now, so certainly that is a factor. There's also changes to condo fees that have added up. But a lot of real estate agents that I spoke to, including one who is originally from Quebec, talked about the fact that this is a wave that the tide will turn around because he believes that Canadians really do enjoy going out to the sun there.
People adjust. You know, someone will come down. If they go to a restaurant 4 or 5 times a week, I mean, maybe they'll chop it down to 2 times a week.
He says that that's because regardless of politics, that many Canadians feel at home in the United States, in Florida particularly. But of course, it's a lot warmer there. Sandy.
Okay, for sure. Thanks, Jen. Coming up after the break, Allied Against Hate.
The warning signs that should be flashing bright red.
What led to a new nuclear energy agreement between Canada and Poland. Plus, Google widens the gulf over a contested name. Drama on the tarmac at a South Korean airport today. An Airbus plane belonging to a South Korean airline caught fire while preparing to take off. There were no serious injuries. Authorities say the fire started inside the plane. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau wrapped up a trip to Poland today with a warning about looming threats to democratic institutions around the world.
The rise of age-old hatreds and intolerances that are beginning to get more and more purchase, not just on the fringes of the political spectrum, but towards the centre as well.
Trudeau also announced an energy cooperation agreement between the two countries that will give Canada's nuclear industry more inroads to the Polish economy. And some changes are coming to Google Maps based on the wishes of Donald Trump. The company is preparing to change the name of the Gulf of Mexico. Google says it will update the name to the Gulf of America when the U.S. government changes its official listing. Donald Trump ordered the body of water to be renamed after taking office. Still ahead, deceived while dating. Inside a romance scam that preyed on multiple Canadian women.
8 months, I was with a man who I thought was John Myers.
And he asked Amy Todd for $60,000 for a horse business that turned out to belong to another woman. She never got her money back.
I actually almost lost my house. I still owe $20,000.
These women didn't know it then, but all of these boyfriends were one and the same. 39-year-old John Mulder, who changed his name and his story multiple times as he met women across Ontario.
All right, a so-called romance scam. Now, there are lots of nice guys out there, but some really bad ones, as we saw in this short clip from CTV W5's John Woodward, who is the investigating reporter on this story. John, I've done this story before for W5, but it keeps happening. Why?
Sandy, these are smart women, as I'm sure were in the story you talked about, but they were hit by a very sophisticated operator. The court heard he'd been doing this almost his entire life. The stories vary, but generally the women met him online. He came at them with various different names and stories, names from Johnny Myers to John Boulder, and in some cases started asking for money pretty quickly, a lot of money, tens of thousands of dollars in some cases. And it was only when he was charged that some of them found out his real name, John Mulder.
Right, and these are vulnerable women looking for love, right? So easily susceptible. he ended up in court and was charged, as you said, and where is he now?
Yeah, we were there for the hearing where he stood up and he pled guilty to 13 counts, amounting to about $160,000. The women believe there are actually more victims out there. And he's been behind bars now for some time, but it also seems that there's some evidence that he's been able to continue this scam even there. So that's one of the things we're going to be looking at tomorrow.
Okay, and I know that there's a big W5 investigation at the end of this. Okay, John, thank you. Now, after the break, protecting Canadians from puppy scams. The new app biting back at fraudsters by pairing buyers with breeders. Something in the works that may offer some potential relief for prospective dog owners. A new app in Newfoundland will soon pair dog breeders with dog buyers in an attempt to provide some peace of mind in an unregulated industry. CTV's Garrett Barry has the details.
Little Beanie is just 2 weeks old, so her and her littermates spend most of their time with their eyes closed. Still, it won't be long before Beanie is off to a, hopefully, perfectly matched home.
We start to see personality come between 4 and 6 weeks, and it's pretty set by about 7.
As a small-scale breeder, Sherry Morris takes a whole lot of pride in her animals. She does everything she can to ensure the pets are well looked after.
What we hope is that we have a family that when you come and talk and you spend a half an hour or an hour seeing the puppies and talking to me, that you have a feel-good feeling.
Others in the pet industry put money way ahead of welfare, so-called puppy mills, where female dogs are bred too often and without proper care, still vex advocates across the country. And full-blown scams are costing Canadians a total of almost $1 million a year, according to the latest data from the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre. James Gray is building a plan to combat some of that. He's getting ready to launch a web app matching buyers and sellers and providing each side with way more information.
Understand, yes, this person, does these health tests, they're reputable, I have good confidence in them.
One key feature would allow money from a buyer to be held by the payment processor, so the seller knows for sure that it's there, but the money would only actually be finally sent when both parties are satisfied with the transaction.
So there's individuals that pretend to be fake breeders, and they ask for a deposit. You pay the deposit, and then all of a sudden they disappear. Morris
is working with 2 similar platforms. She says it's early, but they show promise in making transactions more transparent. Garrett Barry, CTV News, St. John's.
Can't get enough of those puppies. Thank you for sharing your time with us. I'm Sandy Ronaldo. Your local CTV News is coming up, and Omar will be here later tonight. We'll see you tomorrow, we hope. Bye for now. Have a nice evening.